Thank you for coming. We're going to make some history together today.
When Steve Jobs handpicked Walter Isaacson to write his life story, he had already been diagnosed with cancer. But after 40 interviews, the biography provides a vivid picture of a complicated man.
I think it's a tough book.
It's a book that's fair. I mean, this is a real human being, just like...
Tonight, for the first time, you will hear tape recordings of Jobs himself talking about being adopted, creating Apple, and his regret over ignoring what could have been life-saving cancer surgery.
You're born alone, you're going to die alone, and what exactly is it that you have to lose? There's nothing.
It's so much more intimate than a laptop.
When Steve Jobs unveiled the iPad, there was no way he could have predicted what it would mean to people with autism.
Good.
It turns out it may be the perfect device to help unlock the isolation many with autism feel by helping them communicate in ways they couldn't before.
I want a drink.
I always had said when he was younger, it was like he was a computer and I was computer illiterate, and I didn't know how to press the right keys. Sorry. That was the hard part, is you knew there was more in there and you didn't know how to get it out.
I'm Steve Kroft.
I'm Leslie Stahl.
I'm Morley Safer.
I'm Bob Simon.
I'm Laura Logan.
I'm Scott Pelley. Those stories tonight on 60 Minutes.
"7 years ago, Steve Jobs asked Walter Isaacson, a former editor of Time magazine, if he would write his biography. Isaacson, who has done books about Benjamin Franklin and Albert Einstein, thought the request presumptuous and premature since Jobs was still a young man. What Isaacson didn't know at the time, and only a few people did, was that Jobs was about to undergo surgery for pancreatic cancer and was feeling his mortality. It speaks to the secrecy with which Jobs conducted his life and his business, adding mystery to an already compelling figure. In 2009, with Jobs already gravely ill, Isaacson began the first of more than 40 interviews with him. The last was conducted a few weeks before his death. Some of them were tape recorded, and you will hear parts of them tonight. "I have no skeletons in my closet that can't be allowed out," Jobs said. And like a well-timed Apple launch, the book, titled simply Steve Jobs, will be in stores tomorrow, just 2.5 weeks after he died. When Walter Isaacson first began working on the book, which is published by Simon & Schuster, a division of CBS, Steve Jobs' wife, Lorene Powell, told him, "Be honest with his failings, as well as his strengths. There are parts of his life and his personality that are extremely messy. You shouldn't whitewash it. I'd like to see that it's all told truthfully."
He's not warm and fuzzy, you know.
And to do it, Isaacson interviewed more than 100 people, Jobs' friends, family, co-workers, and competitors.
I think it's a tough book.
It's a book that's fair. I mean, this is a real human being.
He had lots of flaws.
He was very petulant. He was very brittle. He could be very, very mean to people at times. And whether it was to a waitress in a restaurant or to a guy who had stayed up all night coding, he could just really just go at them and say, you're doing this all wrong. It's horrible. And you'd say, why did you do that? Why weren't you nicer? And he'd say, I really want to be with people who demand perfection, and this is who I am.
Isaacson believes that much of it can be traced to the earliest years of his life and to the fact that Jobs was born out of wedlock, given up by his birth parents, and adopted by a working-class couple from Mountain View, California.
Paul Jobs was a salt-of-the-earth guy who was a great mechanic, and he taught his son Steve how to make great things. And once they were building a fence, and he said, you got to make the back of the fence that nobody will see just as good looking as the front of the fence. Even though nobody will see it, you will know, and that will show that you're dedicated to making something perfect.
Jobs always knew he was adopted, but it still had a profound effect on him. He told Isaacson this story from his early childhood during one of their many taped interviews.
Now, I remember right here on the lawn telling Lisa McMoyler, who lived across the street, that I was adopted. And she said, so does that mean your real parents didn't want you? Ooh, lightning bolts in my head. I remember running into the house. I think I was probably crying. asking my parents, and they sat me down. They said, "No, you don't understand." They said, "We specifically picked you out."
He said, from then on, I realized that I was not just abandoned, I was chosen, I was special. And I think that's the key to understanding Steve Jobs.
Another factor was geography. Jobs grew up in Northern California, not far from Palo Alto. He was a gifted child who tested off the charts in a neighborhood populated by engineers.
You know, he was raised in a place that was just learning how to turn silicon into gold. It had not yet been named Silicon Valley, but you had the defense industry, you had Hewlett-Packard, but you also had the counterculture of the Bay Area. That entire brew came together in Steve Jobs. He was sort of a hippie-ish rebel kid, loved listening to Dylan music, dropped acid, but also he loved electronics.
Jobs would eventually cross paths with a computer wizard at Berkeley 5 years his senior named Steve Wozniak. They became fast friends, sharing a love of high-tech pranks and a disdain for authority. One of the things they did was to copy and improve an illicit device called the Blue Box, which reproduced the tones that the phone company used and allowed users to make free long-distance phone calls.
Wozniak loves the Blue Box. He's doing it as a prank. Steve says, we can sell them. We can market them. And they sold about 100 of them. And Jobs said to me, that's the beginning of Apple. When we started doing that Blue Box, I knew that with Wozniak's brilliant designs and my marketing skills, we could sell anything.
That was still a few years off. Jobs enrolled at Reed College in Oregon at a time when Timothy Leary was telling students across the country to turn on, tune in, and drop out. Jobs did after one semester.
The time we grew up in was a magical time. It was also very, spiritual time in my life. Definitely taking LSD was one of the most important things in my life. And not the most important, but right up there.
He eventually drifted back to his parents' house and became one of the first 50 employees to work for the video game maker Atari. But he was not a big hit with his coworkers.
Never wore shoes, had very long hair, never bathed. In fact, when he went to work for Atari, they put him on the night shifts because people said he smelled so bad that they didn't want to work with him.
You know, he believed that his vegan diet and the way he lived made it so he didn't have to use deodorant or shower that often. It was an incorrect theory, as people kept pointing out to him at Atari. He was a pretty abrasive and in some ways, cantankerous character. But these people at Atari, they kind of get him. And they say, well, we don't want you to leave, but how about working the night shift?
Jobs took a leave from Atari and spent 7 months wandering across India looking for spiritual enlightenment, and it turned out not to be a waste of time.
And when he comes back, he says, the main thing I've learned is intuition, that the people in India are not just pure rational thinkers, that the great spiritual ones also have an intuition. Likewise, the simplicity of Zen Buddhism really informed his design sense, that notion that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication.
When he returned from his trek, Jobs and Wozniak started building and peddling a primitive computer for hobbyists. With a $1,300 investment, they founded Apple Computer in his parents' garage.
Explain to me how somebody who was a hippie, a college dropout, somebody who drops LSD and marijuana, goes off to India and comes back deciding he wants to be a businessman.
Jobs has within him sort of this conflict, but he doesn't quite see it as a conflict, between being hippie-ish and anti-materialistic but wanting to sell things like Wozniak's board, wanting to create a business. And I think that's exactly what Silicon Valley was all about in those days. Let's do a startup in our parents' garage and try to create a business.
So we don't have to work for somebody else.
Right. And Steve Jobs wasn't all that eager to be an employee at Hewlett-Packard.
He was never much of an engineer. Isaacson said he didn't know how to write code or program a computer. That was Wozniak's department. But Jobs understood their importance and their future. He was obsessed with making an attractive, simple, inexpensive computer, the Apple II, marketed as the first home computer. It really didn't do much, but tech-savvy people snapped them up, along with school systems. And as he tells Isaacson on tape, he was soon worth millions of dollars.
It wasn't very many years before, on paper, we were worth a lot of money. And I was like 25. when, you know, we were worth maybe $50 million. I knew I never had to worry about money again. And so I went from not worrying about money because I was pretty poor to not worrying about money because I had a lot of money.